Before the world wakes up, before the noise begins its relentless march into your heart, before your phone lights up with everyone else's urgencies. There is a quiet moment that either changes everything or slips through your fingers unnoticed. And the tragedy is not that this moment exists, but that so many of us stand right in front of it every single day and walk away as if it were nothing. We wake up exhausted, rushed, anxious, and spiritually starved, wondering why life feels heavy, why our hearts feel scattered, why our days feel empty, even when they are full. And we rarely stop to ask the most uncomfortable question of all: what if the problem is not what we are missing in the world, but what we are neglecting in those first sacred hours of the morning? There is something profoundly telling about the way a day begins. Not just psychologically, but spiritually. The morning is not neutral territory. It is not merely a transition between sleep and activity. It is a battleground. It is a gift. It is a test. And it is a mirror that reflects the state of our priorities. Because what you give your first moments to reveals what truly owns your heart. The early hours are not just time, they are a trust. And how we treat them determines not only the quality of our productivity, but the condition of our souls. We live in a culture that glorifies exhaustion. We wear burnout like a badge of honor. We boast about how little sleep we get, how busy we are, how overwhelmed our schedules feel. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that being constantly drained is not a sign of importance. It is a sign of imbalance. And nowhere is this imbalance more visible than in how we treat the morning, especially the hours surrounding Fajr. We hit snooze as if we are silencing a nuisance rather than responding to an invitation. We rush through prayer as if it were an obstacle rather than an opening. Or worse, we delay it, compress it, or abandon it entirely, convincing ourselves that we will make it up later, as if barakah can be postponed. But barakah does not work like that. Barakah is not quantity. It is not speed. It is not efficiency in the worldly sense. Barakah is a divine expansion that cannot be forced and cannot be faked. It descends. And it descends where there is presence, humility, and intentionality. It descends where hearts are awake before bodies are exhausted. And it descends most generously in those early hours when the world is still quiet enough for the soul to be heard. There is a reason why the first prayer of the day is not placed conveniently after sunrise once we are fully awake and ready to conquer our to-do lists. There is a reason it cuts into our sleep, our comfort, our desire to remain unconscious just a little longer. Because Fajr is not just a prayer. It is a declaration. It is the moment you decide who you belong to before the world starts demanding ownership over you. It is the moment you choose obedience over ease, presence over passivity, meaning over momentum. And yet, how often do we treat Fajr as something to get through, rather than something to receive? How often do we reduce it to a checkbox rather than recognizing it as a doorway? We underestimate it because it is quiet. We dismiss it because it is small. But the most powerful things in life are often subtle. Seeds do not announce themselves with noise. Light does not shout when it enters a dark room. And the most transformative shifts in the heart rarely arrive with spectacle. The early morning is when the heart is most honest. It has not yet been distracted, defended, or dulled by the noise of the day. It is when excuses are stripped away, when motivations are laid bare. And that is precisely why it is so difficult. Because standing before your Creator in those moments means standing without masks. It means acknowledging your weakness without distraction. It means admitting your dependence without performance. And that kind of honesty is uncomfortable for a heart that has grown accustomed to control. Many of us approach our days already depleted, already anxious, already behind. We wake up late, rush through obligations, and then wonder why everything feels heavy. But heaviness is not always the result of too much to do. Sometimes it is the result of starting the day without anchoring the heart. When you begin the day disconnected from the source of strength, you spend the rest of the day trying to draw water from empty wells. You chase productivity without purpose. You seek motivation without meaning, and you confuse movement with progress. The barakah of Fajr is not magic. It does not mean your day will be easy or free of hardship. It means your day will be aligned. It means that even when things are difficult, they are not empty. Even when you are tired, you are not lost. Even when plans fall apart, your heart remains oriented towards something higher than outcomes. Barakah does not remove effort, it multiplies impact. It does not erase struggle, it infuses it with meaning. There is a quiet discipline that forms in those who guard their mornings. A strength that does not come from caffeine or adrenaline, but from consistency and surrender. When you rise for Fajr, you are training your soul to choose what matters over what feels good. And that choice, repeated day after day, reshapes the heart. It teaches you that comfort is not the same as peace. That rest is not the same as avoidance. That sleep, while necessary, is not always the answer to exhaustion. Exhaustion is often spiritual before it is physical. We are tired because we are scattered. We are drained because we are attached to too many things that cannot sustain us. And Fajr is a daily intervention against that fragmentation. It gathers the heart before the day disperses it. It reminds you that your worth is not measured by output, your value is not determined by approval, and your security is not dependent on control. But the tragedy is that many of us show up physically while remaining absent internally. We pray with our bodies while our minds are already racing toward the day. We recite words without allowing them to penetrate the heart. We stand before the one who gives life, yet our hearts feel lifeless. And then we wonder why the barakah feels elusive. Barakah requires presence. It requires that you bring your heart into the room, not just your limbs. The early morning does not ask for perfection. It asks for sincerity. It asks that you come as you are, sleepy, distracted, imperfect, and still choose to stand, still choose to turn, still choose to listen. And in that choice, something begins to shift. Slowly, quietly, without drama, the heart softens, the noise settles. The day takes on a different tone. There is a difference between living reactively and living intentionally. Most people live in reaction mode. They respond to emails, messages, deadlines, expectations. They are pulled by urgency rather than guided by purpose. And the morning sets the trajectory for which mode you inhabit. When you wake up already responding to the world, you spend the rest of the day being shaped by it. When you wake up grounded in remembrance, you enter the world with agency, clarity, and restraint. This is why the early hours are so fiercely contested, not just by sleep, but by distraction, not just by fatigue, but by fear. Because when you slow down enough to be still, you are confronted with what you have been avoiding: the unanswered questions, the unresolved pain, the attachments that have quietly taken root in the heart. And it is easier to stay busy than to be honest, easier to stay asleep than to wake up to yourself. But healing does not happen in noise. Transformation does not happen in haste. And intimacy with the divine does not grow in neglect. It grows in the small, consistent moments when you choose presence over avoidance. When you choose to sit with your Lord before sitting with your fears. When you choose to remember before being remembered by the world. The barakah of Fajr spills into everything that follows. It changes how you speak, how you listen, how you react. It gives you a filter through which the day is processed. A lens that reminds you that not everything deserves your emotional investment. That not every disappointment is a disaster. That not every delay is a denial. And that reminder, repeated daily, slowly retrains the heart. We often chase motivation, waiting to feel inspired before we act. But discipline precedes inspiration. Consistency precedes clarity. And the morning is where that discipline is forged, not in grand gestures, but in quiet choices, not in dramatic transformations, but in subtle shifts. You wake up, you stand, you turn, you breathe, you remember, and that is enough to begin. It is tempting to believe that spiritual growth requires more time, more knowledge, more resources, but often it requires less distraction, less noise, less indulgence, and more intentionality with what you already have. The early hours are not asking for more of you, they are asking for the best of you, the part of you that is not yet worn down by comparison, criticism, and chaos. When you waste the morning, you don't just lose time, you lose alignment, you lose an opportunity to orient your heart before it is pulled in 1,000 directions. And that loss compounds throughout the day. Small irritations feel larger, minor setbacks feel heavier, and the heart, unanswered, becomes reactive and fragile. But when you protect the morning, even imperfectly, something else happens. You begin to notice a subtle resilience, a steadiness that does not depend on circumstances, a calm that is not easily shaken, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because your heart is no longer trying to carry what it was never meant to carry alone. The secret of Fajr Barakah is not in length, but in depth, not in performance, but in presence. It is in allowing yourself to be seen in your weakness, your longing, your hope. It is in admitting that you need guidance before you need success, that you need grounding before you need momentum, that you need connection before you need accomplishment. And perhaps the most profound shift happens when you stop seeing Fajr as an obligation that interrupts your sleep and start seeing it as a lifeline that interrupts your drift. Because drift is subtle, it does not announce itself. It happens slowly through neglect, through distraction, through small compromises that seem insignificant in isolation. And the morning is where drift is corrected, gently but firmly. Every sunrise is a reminder that renewal is possible. That no matter how yesterday unfolded, you are being given another chance to begin again. But that chance must be met with intention. It must be received, not ignored. And the question is not whether the morning holds barakah. The question is whether we are willing to show up to receive it, to protect it, to honor it, and to allow it to shape the rhythm of our lives in ways that are subtle, profound, and deeply transformative. The way a person treats the morning quietly exposes what truly holds their heart. Before obligations begin competing for attention, before people start making demands, and before distractions flood the mind, the early hours stand as an unfiltered mirror of priorities. In that space, there are no witnesses to impress and no expectations to perform for. What remains is a simple choice, to rise with intention or to remain surrendered to comfort. That choice, repeated day after day, shapes not only how time is used, but how the heart is trained. The morning is often misunderstood as empty or insignificant, yet it carries immense weight precisely because of its stillness. When the world is quiet, the heart is loud. Whatever a person reaches for first reveals what they believe will sustain them. If the first instinct is to escape back into sleep, distraction, or urgency, it suggests an inner belief that rest or productivity will provide what the soul needs. But if the first instinct is to turn toward remembrance, even briefly and imperfectly, it reflects a deeper understanding that meaning must come before motion. What we prioritize in the morning sets the tone for everything that follows. A heart that begins the day anchored is less easily shaken by delays, disappointments, and demands. A heart that begins the day rushed and disconnected often remains reactive, constantly trying to catch up, constantly feeling behind. This is not because the day itself is heavier, but because the foundation was never laid. When intention is missing at the start, everything else feels unstable. The danger of neglecting the morning is not just wasted time, but unnoticed drift. Drift does not arrive loudly or dramatically. It happens when small choices accumulate, when comfort consistently outweighs commitment, when intention is postponed again and again. Over time, the heart adjusts to this neglect, convincing itself that it is normal to feel scattered, tired, and spiritually distant. The morning, when honored, interrupts that drift by forcing a pause, a reckoning, a return. Priorities are not formed through words or aspirations, but through patterns. What we consistently choose when no one is watching becomes our true hierarchy of values. The early hours strip away excuses and expose sincerity. Choosing presence in those moments is not about perfection or length, but about direction. It is a declaration that the heart will not be handed over to the world before it is grounded in something higher. When the morning is treated as sacred, even in small ways, it reshapes how a person sees time itself. Time is no longer something to chase or fight against, but something to steward. The heart learns that not every moment needs to be filled with noise, and not every silence needs to be escaped. In this way, the morning becomes less about discipline and more about honesty, an honest encounter with what the heart depends on, and a quiet opportunity to choose again. Fajr is not simply an item on a religious checklist, nor is it a ritual meant to be completed and left behind as the day begins. It is a declaration that shapes identity before the world has a chance to define it. In the stillness of early morning, when comfort is most tempting and the body resists movement, standing for Fajr becomes a quiet statement about who is being obeyed and what is being prioritized. It is a choice made before applause, before recognition, and before obligation, which is precisely why it carries such weight. Every morning presents two opposing poles. One invites ease, delay, and unconsciousness. The other invites presence, surrender, and intention. Fajr exists at the intersection of these forces, asking the believer to choose awareness over numbness and obedience over instinct. That choice is not dramatic, yet it is deeply formative. Each time it is made, the heart learns that devotion is not reserved for moments of convenience, but expressed most truthfully when it requires sacrifice. What makes Fajr unique is that it is offered before the day has made its demands. It establishes a relationship of precedence. When a person responds to that call, they are declaring that their connection with Allah does not depend on spare time or leftover energy. It comes first even when the body is tired and the mind is slow. This precedence carries forward into the day, subtly influencing other decisions, reminding the heart that obedience is not an interruption to life, but its foundation. Fajr also declares presence. To rise cleans, and stand is to consciously step out of heedlessness. Sleep is a state of disconnection, and waking for Fajr is an act of resistance against remaining spiritually unconscious. It signals a willingness to be awake, not just physically, but inwardly. In that awareness, the heart begins to align, shedding the illusions of control and self-sufficiency that often dominate waking hours. There is humility embedded in Fajr. The early morning exposes weakness, heavy limbs, wandering thoughts, and the desire to delay. Yet showing up in that state is itself an acknowledgement of dependence. It is an admission that strength does not originate within the self, but is sought from the one who grants it. This humility softens the heart and opens it to receive guidance rather than rely solely on effort. Over time, this daily declaration reshapes a person's inner compass. Life's pressures no longer dictate worth or direction in the same way. Even when the day becomes chaotic, there remains a quiet memory of having begun in surrender. Fajr teaches that alignment precedes action, and that success without orientation is hollow. By choosing to stand at that hour, the believer repeatedly affirms that meaning comes before movement, and that obedience is not a burden, but a return. Barakah is often misunderstood as ease, comfort, or the absence of hardship, yet its true nature is far deeper and more subtle. Barakah is alignment, a quiet ordering of the heart that allows effort to carry weight and moments to hold meaning. When the day begins with Fajr, it is not a promise that everything will unfold smoothly, but a guarantee that whatever unfolds will not be empty. Difficulty may still arrive, but it arrives within a framework of purpose rather than chaos. A day filled with barakah is not necessarily lighter in tasks, but lighter in the heart. There is a difference between being busy and being burdened. Without alignment, even small responsibilities feel heavy, draining energy and patience. With barakah, the same responsibilities are met with steadiness and clarity. The work does not disappear, but the heart is no longer fractured by it. This is because barakah does not reduce effort, it strengthens intention. When Fajr anchors the morning, it quietly recalibrates the internal compass. The heart begins the day oriented toward Allah rather than outcomes. This orientation changes how challenges are interpreted. Delays are no longer immediately seen as failures, and obstacles are not instantly labeled as punishments. Instead, there is space for reflection and trust. The believer learns to navigate uncertainty without panic because the foundation of the day was not built on control. Barakah also manifests as restraint. In an aligned day, not every emotion demands a reaction, and not every distraction deserves attention. The heart develops a filter, distinguishing between what is urgent and what is essential. This restraint is not repression, but wisdom. It protects energy from being scattered and preserves focus for what truly matters. In this way, barakah guards the heart even when the environment is overwhelming. One of the most powerful aspects of barakah is that it continues to operate even when effort feels insufficient. There are days when motivation is low and productivity is imperfect, yet alignment allows sincerity to compensate for limitation. Actions rooted in remembrance carry a depth that exceeds their outward form. A small act, performed with presence, outweighs 1,000 movements done in heedlessness. Without barakah, success can feel hollow and exhausting. Achievements lose their sweetness because they were pursued in isolation from meaning. With barakah, even unfinished goals and unmet plans retain value because the heart understands that worth is not confined to outcomes. This understanding creates resilience. The believer learns to move forward without being crushed by comparison or disappointment. Starting the day with Fajr does not remove struggle, but it ensures that struggle is not wasted. Effort becomes an offering rather than a burden. Time becomes a trust rather than a threat. In this alignment, the believer experiences a quiet strength that carries them through the day, not because life becomes easy, but because the heart remains rooted in something unshakable. When the morning is neglected, the heart often begins the day already fragmented. There is a subtle but significant difference between waking up intentionally and waking up reactively. In neglect, the day starts in a state of pursuit rather than presence. The mind rushes ahead, anticipating demands, replaying worries, and bracing for pressure before the body has even fully awakened. This scattered beginning sets the tone for everything that follows, making the entire day feel heavier than it needs to be. Spiritual fragmentation rarely announces itself clearly. It does not arrive with a single dramatic failure, but through gradual disconnection. When the early hours are wasted, the heart is denied the opportunity to gather itself before being pulled outward. Without that anchoring moment, emotions become more volatile and patience wears thin more quickly. Small inconveniences feel disproportionately frustrating because the inner reserves were never replenished. Exhaustion in these moments is often misunderstood as purely physical. While lack of sleep certainly plays a role, there is a deeper fatigue that comes from beginning the day without meaning. When the heart has not been oriented toward Allah, it attempts to derive stability from productivity, validation, or control. These sources are unreliable, and relying on them requires constant effort. The result is a tiredness that no amount of rest seems to cure. Neglecting the morning also increases reactivity. Without a moment of stillness and remembrance, the heart becomes easily hijacked by circumstances. Words are spoken more sharply, judgments are made more quickly, and disappointments are felt more deeply. This is not because the individual lacks character, but because the heart is operating without grounding. When there is no internal anchor, external forces dictate emotional states. Over time, this pattern creates a sense of chronic dissatisfaction. Even productive days feel empty, and accomplishments fail to bring lasting peace. The heart senses that something essential is missing but struggles to identify it. This is the quiet cost of neglect, a gradual normalization of disconnection. What once felt unsettling becomes familiar, and spiritual hunger is mistaken for stress or boredom. The morning is meant to interrupt this cycle. It is a daily chance to gather what has been scattered and realign what has drifted. When it is ignored, drift accelerates. The heart adapts to functioning without intentionality, convincing itself that survival is enough. But survival without purpose slowly erodes joy and resilience. Fragmentation also weakens discernment. Without a reflective start, it becomes harder to distinguish between what deserves attention and what merely demands it. Energy is spent responding rather than choosing, reacting rather than reflecting. The heart becomes crowded, yet strangely empty at the same time. Neglecting the morning does not make a person irredeemable, but it does make the journey heavier. Each day begins without the quiet recalibration that prevents unnecessary wear. Over time, the weight accumulates, not because life is cruel, but because the heart has been deprived of its natural source of grounding and renewal.